When I told June I would give this talk back in November, I had one title for the talk, and then it's changed in my mind 3 or 4 times. So the title of the talk today is Where the Rubber Meets the Road, Practicing in Difficult Times. And I'd like to start with a koan from our Zen tradition. Vimalakirti said, I am sick because the world is sick. And Umon said, the whole world is medicine. The whole world is medicine. What comes up for you when you hear that?
Good things are around, you just have to take them. Good things are around, you just have to take them.
The things that are around, you have to take them. Okay, you take them as medicine, you mean? Or,
sure. It's like this chamomile, it's around me.
Okay. The chamomile is medicine. Yeah. What else is medicine?
Sunlight.
Sunlight?
Nature, kind of in general.
Nature.
Challenges.
Darkness.
Challenges.
People. Anger. Breathing.
Music, art.
Not breathing. Art. Chaos. Is chaos medicine?
Yes.
The whole world is medicine. That's a pretty broad lens. So, we tend to have a fairly narrow lens on things. In other words, we're looking at the news, and it's like in front of our face, and we have news now 24/7. And we're doing pretty good if we can think in terms of a decade, which is, what's that, 10 years, or a millennium, which is 1,000 years. What if we were to take the lens back even further? How long have human beings been on the planet? Does anyone know? Long time, right? Millions of years? Well, let's go back 100,000 years. Now, 100,000 years was Paleolithic man, and we know that the civilization for the next 90,000 years, from 100,000 years ago to about 12,000 years ago, was primarily nomadic, hunter-gatherer civilization. They moved. They didn't stay in one place. They had smaller populations. And then about 10,000 years ago, we have a huge major shift in our civilization towards agriculture. And it might be useful to appreciate what happened when we made that shift. That was a long time ago. So we're taking a wide lens here now. So first, to appreciate the nomadic cultures, and you'd say, well, how do we know? It was too long ago. We weren't around then. But anthropologists can look at there's not a lot of them, but there are nomadic cultures still in existence on the planet, and anthropologists have studied them. And so they've reconstructed what the nomadic culture was like. And what we know from those studies is that these nomadic tribes were egalitarian. Their means of conflict resolution was just to leave the area. If they had a conflict with another tribe, they didn't stick around particularly and have a war. They just left, went somewhere else. They didn't have religion. We have, in many ways, projected a lot of our own religious ideas upon cave paintings and stuff, but basically they didn't have any difference between the sacred and the profane. It was all, the sacred was immanent in everything they did. They didn't have any sense of a religion as we think of it in our culture. So they were horizontal. They weren't particularly afraid of death. Death was just part of life. It wasn't a big deal. You were here and then you weren't here. One of the really interesting things about child rearing in nomadic tribes is that they nurture, the baby was nurtured by the mother for a much longer period of time, 3 to 4 years. And they didn't have as many children because the mother couldn't be carrying around 2 or 3 babies when they were traveling from one place to another. So basically mothers would, on the average, maybe have a child every 4 or 5 years. Now, it's important not to romanticize any of this because it was really brutal. They practiced infanticide. In other words, if they had another baby that they didn't want to have, they killed the baby. It was brutal. But because the babies were nurtured at the breasts of the mother for a much longer period of time, they had what we would call today healthy attachment. They didn't play with toys. Toys are transitional objects. They played with other kids. Do you see the difference? Do you know what a transitional object is? In our culture, in agriculture civilization, one of the big shifts that happened was babies were raised for less length of time with the mother. And so not only was the birth traumatic, but the separation from the mother is traumatic in our culture. We think of it as normal. So we don't play with other kids as much in our culture. We play with toys when we grow up. Toys are transitional objects that are replacing the mother that we're missing as a baby, as a young child. Do you get what I'm saying? If you don't understand this, try to take a teddy bear away from a 4-year-old. They'll scream bloody murder. Well, try to take religious symbols away from religious people. Try to take the cross away from Christians. Hey, how about taking the Buddha away from the altar? People don't like that either. Buddhists get upset with that. Why can't we have a Buddha on the altar? It's beautiful. It's a transitional object. I mean, that's one way to look at it. So we have nomadic cultures that were egalitarian, and their primary modality was paradox. In other words, they were very comfortable with uncertainty and paradox in their world. That was what their reality was, and they didn't try to resolve it. They lived in a world where they had to be alert. They were in the jungle or the forest, and there were animals, and they were hunting, and they could be hunted by the animal, and they were awake to paradox and uncertainty. That was their primary mode of operating. And then we have this shift to agriculture, which is a huge, huge shift in civilization. Now we started settling down, and for the first time we start storing grains and things. Now once you start storing grains, there has to be somebody that is in charge of it. So immediately you get elites, you get priests, you get people that have more power because they are managing and controlling the things that are being stored, and now you start to have a hierarchical culture developing. And you get all of the vertical monotheistic religions that develop. You get all the fear of death and the need for afterlife and all the things that go with vertical religions. And why is that important? Well, because it helps people resolve uncertainty. You no longer have paradox as the primary way of operating in agricultural civilization. You have forms of hierarchy and religious traditions that give people some sense of certainty. That's a big shift. And it's certainly not egalitarian. There's war and population explosions. Children aren't raised for as long with the mother. You have unhealthy attachment. all kinds of implications there that we could pursue. But I just want you to get that there was this shift about 10,000 years ago in our world in terms of civilization. Does this make sense? So why is this important? I mean, why? Because I actually think that when we appreciate the practice of Zen as a spiritual path, what we are more or less coming to terms with is the paradox at the heart of the mystery of our human experience. And learning that there's some liveliness there in this place, and I'll use focusing as an example, because I think focusing is we really underestimate how deep and rich is the practice of focusing that we teach in our focusing classes. Having a felt sense is where we're living in the body, and then we bring forth. We have an implicit experience which is not verbal, but is alive in us, all of us. And then as we become more aware of that implicit embodied experience where the paradox is, we find words for it. It becomes explicit. But the life is in that liminal zone between the two. And let me give you an example, because I'm an artist, and you see some of my paintings here. I'll give you an example of how this works for me as an artist. There's a kind of honesty about that implicit, we might call it the unconscious. There's an integrity to that in all of us. And that's trusting the paradox. And if we are uncomfortable with the uncertainty in the paradox, we want to resolve it, we want closure, we want to reach for something that's rational and defined and nail it down. And then we feel better. But we've missed a whole chunk of the integrity of being a human being in the process. How does that work artistically? Well, I'll tell you how it works for me. I'll find myself making a statement saying, I need to paint with more color. And the next thing I know, I'm painting in black and white. Or I'll say, I'm just painting, my paintings are too chaotic and they're too troubling and dark. I need to paint something more beautiful, and the next thing I know, I'm in a swamp, painting monsters and alligators, and Jaws. I'm hearing Jaws music, Or I say, I'm really want to paint something more, I need to be more honest and paint the real suffering in the world, and get down to it. And the next thing I know, I'm painting beautiful things that are love and light and cheerful and joyful. My unconscious doesn't listen to that part of me that makes up those rules. My unconscious doesn't care at all about my agenda any more than the Dharma does care about your ego's agenda. And there's a kind of truth there that we learn through Zen practice, that there's a trusting of the unconscious. We don't trust it because it's not fully known to us, but through the mystery of being a human being and growing and sitting with ourselves, you learn that there's something in you, there's some wisdom in the body that is when we speak of Buddha nature, I think we're speaking of that wisdom in each of us. It's a larger sense of who you are, but it's not bounded by your rational mind. Is this making any kind of sense? The whole world is medicine. So how do we practice in these extraordinary, difficult times? On the election eve, I remember when I first heard the news that our president, whose name shall not be mentioned here, was elected. And I felt like something died. I had the felt sense of that. I still have the felt sense of that something has died. It's here in my body. You have that felt sense? No? Okay. You might have another.
Medicine.
Huh?
It's medicine.
It's medicine. Yeah, it's all medicine. It's all medicine. So, what my first thought was for this talk today, when I was thinking of it back in November, was to talk about our honored American ancestors. And what I mean by that is that when something is lost in our culture, or seems to be, and we have a strong felt sense it's giving us some information about that, we could take that's like a ghost. We have a ghost that shows up, the elephant in the room, so to speak. And we don't know what to do with that. And I think we have a very deep spiritual tradition that knows what to do with that ghost. We invite that ghost to become an ancestor. Now, in our culture, ancestors are not, we don't give a lot of stock for ancestors, but in fact, you have family ancestors in your family lineage. We have a spiritual lineage here of some quite wonderful spiritual teachers that went through India and China and Japan and America. And in the Chinese culture, they practice something called the Ghost Festival, and it's very old, very, very old, and it was done a long time ago, not in the context particularly of religion, but in the context of ancestors. And what they did in Chinese culture is when someone died, they had a ghost festival, and it's related to when we do the Gate of Sweet Nectar. It's the same kind of thing. They would do offerings and put out flowers and have celebrations for that person that had died, and they would resurrect that person as an ancestor to support their family. So what I thought of, the first thing I thought of after the election was we need some support. We need some strength from, where's that going to come from? I'm just washing around in chaos and going up and down every day listening to the news. It's awful. And I got the felt sense. So what feels right to me, and it still does, is to take this ghost of something that's gone missing and do a Gate of Sweet Nectar for that ghost and put up a plaque called our Honored American Ancestor and invite this ghost to become an ancestor to our community to give us strength. And so why don't we just try this for a moment? I'll do very briefly a big mind facilitation. I want to invite you to be if you were the honored American ancestor, what could you say about yourself? And speak in the first person. And we just sit with this for a moment. I know this is a little strange. Let me just sit with the moment that you're the honored American ancestor. What can you say? What do you have to say to us here this morning? Anybody?
I visualize being the Statue of Liberty.
Okay. Okay.
So I visualize the light and the saying of bringing your huddled masses to this golden door. And so I kind of...
Okay, so you're speaking in the first person. You are the Statue of Liberty that welcomes all the people to our shores, immigrants, the people that come from other places are welcome.
That is a gift too. So I as a gift.
You are a gift to...
I was given as a gift, and I am a gift.
You were given this a gift to our country from France, and you are giving the gift back to... Marvelous. Beautiful. There's an honored American ancestor. It hasn't gone missing.
I stand for liberty and justice for all.
Liberty and justice for all. Yes. Okay. What else? Yeah.
Well, the first thing that popped into my head earlier, before we even started thinking, was life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Uh-huh.
Especially that liberty part. And
Uh-huh.
also the pursuit of happiness.
Okay, so you
Things that our country is really, over in its history, has really stood out for.
okay, you stand for liberty
Yes, yes.
Mm-hmm. and the pursuit of happiness and well-being.
With opportunities, opportunities for everyone.
Okay, so you stand for liberty and the opportunities for people to excel and be well and to follow their dreams.
Yes, and have control of
Their destiny or...
yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I am the Lincoln Memorial.
You are the Lincoln Memorial. Can you say more?
I lived through a great crisis
Yes?
in the Civil War, and we came out of that.
You helped us live through that crisis, didn't you?
Yes,
You are Lincoln now.
yes.
Okay, what can you say about yourself as Lincoln? What are some of the qualities that you have that might be helpful for us now?
Honesty,
You're honest.
sense of humor.
Yeah, sense of humor. You tell good stories.
Yeah.
Yeah. What else?
Everybody is equal.
Okay. What else?
I came from poor beginnings.
Yes, you did. You have quite a bit of empathy for people suffering. You have some quality of strength for standing your ground amidst when things are really dire around you too. And you kind of led us through a very dark time of our history.
And I worked with my rivals. I put some of them in the
You
cabinet.
did, didn't you? Politically, you would always put your rivals in your cabinet or in your government. You would, when you won, you didn't just slay your rivals. You invited them to come in and participate. You did that from even before you were president. I think you did that as a senator here in Illinois. That was one of your qualities. Yeah. Okay. So, wait. We'll just. Uh-huh.
I am here. I have survived.
You have survived.
I am not disposable.
You are not disposable. Okay.
I know how to survive.
You know how to survive, and you're not disposable. You want to say anything more about that? What does that mean, you're not disposable?
Sure, it's such a basic kind of.
Well, you have some dignity that is honored and not just, it's not trivial.
Yeah, there's something that comes from within.
Yeah.
That being alive is part of my nature, and maybe there's a balance in. I'm not sure.
Okay, but being a human being is important and dignified, and it matters that you are a person.
More
Who you are
fundamental
matters.
than other values.
Huh? Say that again?
Just valuing my survival is more fundamental than any one particular value. It's
Okay.
It seems to be
Okay. All right.
I am Rosa Parks.
You are Rosa Parks. Can you say more about her?
I stood tall, held my pocketbook, and showed how to be dignified and a warrior and peaceful.
Okay. You stood your ground. You were pretty brave. And there was a lot of the powers that be were pushing against you.
I just had this deep sort of feeling in the center of my body, and it was like the ghost was saying, I love you. It's like I love you deeply.
Mm-hmm.
Just this feeling of love, protection.
Mm-hmm. You're protected by the love. The love is a protecting.
Yeah, just like sort of beyond words in the center of your body.
Yeah.
It's like a strength.
Yeah. Okay. Just stay with that.
And I was here before the tall ships came in.
You were here before the tall ships came in. Ah, yes. You want to say a little more about you?
I was here and I lived in harmony with nature,
Yes.
with other beings,
Yeah.
and we shared
Yes.
and we supported the weaker ones in our community.
You supported?
The weaker ones in our community.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
I have two things, I think. First, I'd say I don't advocate violence, but I would say John Brown, who I am willing to do what is necessary in my time and place, in his place, including being violent to what he saw as righting the wrongs of slavery, and willing to take up arms to do that.
Okay.
And I would say additionally, especially the early labor movement, and a variety of people in it who, were willing to engage, I guess their word, as warriors to say, yes, this is the only way we'll get our dignity is to take to the streets and to be beaten and killed if necessary, but we're going to engage in fight.
Okay. You're willing to engage in a revolution. You're not a nice person.
Well, sometimes that's necessary.
Huh?
I guess sometimes.
I don't think your slogan is "Have a happy day." Or buy. I just saw an ad the other day. They have an ad now. You can buy big teddy bears. There's a company that you can go on the internet and buy a big transitional object to make you feel better. I don't think you would buy that teddy bear.
Right, you're right, because on Inauguration Day, I didn't want to buy a big teddy bear that said "Make America Great Again." You're right.
Yeah, we need to get rid of that phrase "America First." That's a really toxic, has a context and a history we should appreciate. And language is being abused. One of the ghosts that's arising for us is that language is being abused.
I think of two American presidents, one of whom does not get the respect that he deserves, and the other who will, over time, be recognized as a great president.
Who are you?
The first one would be Jimmy Carter,
Uh-huh.
and the second one would be Barack Obama.
Yes, the interesting thing about you, Jimmy Carter, is that you gave that wonderful speech to us. Was that 1980 you gave it? And you actually had the courage to tell Americans that you thought we were too consumer-oriented and we needed a deeper, meaningful spiritual practice. And Reagan, your opponent, promised us everything, and you lost in a landslide to Reagan. Americans didn't want what you were offering to us. Didn't want it.
There were energy issues.
Yeah. You talked about that in that speech, I believe.
I wore a cardigan, and I told people, if it's cold, don't turn up the fact you're cold. Don't put a sweater on. And Ronald Reagan said, don't worry about it.
Yeah, Ronald Reagan said what every American wants to hear is that there's no limits. Just go shopping. It's the American dream, after all. So, yeah, you were, I think, one of the last public figures that actually spoke to us about an alternative possibility with some integrity, and we didn't want to hear it. Sorry.
You didn't buy it.
We didn't. But you've been an extraordinary president afterwards, I think, showing us an example of what it's like to be a compassionate statesman and care for the poor and build homes for Habitat for Humanity. And you really, I think you are greatly loved by many people now.
Well, thank you.
I'm glad you're here this morning.
I'm all the quiet warriors who serve by the example of how they live, how we live.
Mhm.
Compassionately loving, showing that these feelings and actually getting in there and working with other people
Mhm.
and not being bombastic or showy in
Uh-huh.
any way.
Yeah. That was quite a lot of strength, I heard. Didn't you hear a lot of strength coming from our ancestors? Why can't we have that strength in ourselves and in our community to guide us through the dark times? Why can't we have it right now? You have it. You were just embodying it. There was a Cuban writer, Rinaldo Reyes, who was imprisoned in Cuba for being gay, and his writings were banned. And he said that it's important to remember that people like him are not the counterculture. The regime that imprisoned him was the counterculture. People like him were the culture which he described as everything which is diverse, luminous, mysterious, and festive, which was being repressed by the powers that be in Cuba. So interesting, we now are in the position of being conservatives, of preserving the values of the culture we find important. Well, there's a little switch. I thought I was a progressive. See how easily we get stuck in words and labels and don't really explore what they mean? If you take something in and digest it, which I think what meditation and Zen practice is inviting us to do, and really get it for what it is for you, not what it is in the news or what it is in the squawk box on Facebook or whatever, but what it is for you, truly, then I think you find that you are representing something, some integrity and values that are important, that really don't match the conventional language. And that's the beautiful thing, actually, about the felt sense, is that when we are alive to our embodied wisdom, we find art and expression and language and poetry that matches that embodied wisdom that doesn't necessarily you can't find it in the dictionary. The language is in your body. It's not out there. And when we look for the language out there, we're missing a huge piece, again, of this embodied wisdom. And it's very hard to trust this because there's lots of distractions. And I think when we're sitting, we are being courageous, and we are honoring and trying as best we can to trust this embodied wisdom that we have. koan here. Here's another koan from our tradition. Toizi said, "You've hit a barrier and can't find your way home. If you go forward, you'll fall into the hands of the angry gods. If you retreat, you'll slip into the hell of the hungry ghosts. If you go neither forward nor backward, you'll drown in dead water. What will you do?" Yeah. You've hit a barrier. The election results have been announced. You've hit a barrier and can't find your way home. If you go forward, you'll fall into the hands of the angry gods. If you retreat, you'll slip into the hell of the hungry ghosts. If you go neither forward nor backward, you'll drown in dead water. What will you do?
Rise.
Cry?
Rise.
Rise. Oh, okay. Rise. Yeah. Yeah, it does seem that there's a possibility for us to find some fierce compassion, fierce determination that resides within us.
It's like a knife or something.
A knife, yeah. Well, we have one of our transitional objects is Manju Sri Bodhisattva, who has this cutting sword that cuts both the object and the subject. It's a no bullshit kind of thing. Cuts any kind of bullshit. We all have that cutting intelligence within us. You do. That's what we mean when we say you're the Buddha. You are that non-dual intelligence. But that takes some practice and courage to trust that intelligence in you, because look what happens. We get stuck so easily. We harden our hearts, don't we? How do we do that? I want to be right. My point of view is right. I want to win. It's terribly important that I win the argument. We harden our hearts. You can all relate to this. We create war through our own aggression. It's not all out there. We elected the president whose name shall not be mentioned here. You may not have voted for him, but our country elected the president that we now have. The whole world is medicine. So, where is the war? Who's fighting it? Is it in our families? In our relationships? At work? On the internet? How do we each harden? Become rigid? We all do, right? Don't we all do this? I think Zen is inviting us to soften and open our hearts, and that requires an enormous amount of courage when everything around us seems to be falling apart. When we feel threatened, we get hardened, we get rigid, we get defensive. It's almost a knee-jerk thing in us, and I think we need to really, really practice with intention to keep our hearts open. Having an open heart isn't a weak thing. It's a fierce compassion. We may have strange dreams that lead to unexpected resolve. It's the paradox and the mystery. Aiken Roshi said something just beautiful. He said, our practice is not to clear up the mystery. It is to make the mystery clear. How do we clear up the mystery? We clear up the mystery by disowning the uncomfortableness of the uncertainty and the paradox. This is the heart of our felt sense. It's part of the felt sense. The felt sense is always paradoxical. It has both the dark and the light in it. At least that's been my experience. So when we try to clear up the mystery, we're like agricultural civilization, we're reaching for rationality and certainty to help us feel safer. But in the process, what goes missing is the aliveness, the spontaneity, the openness of who we really are when we are authentic Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, as you all are. So I've been having this wonderful conversation with Nora Bateson, who's Gregory Bateson's daughter, and she's just a marvelous poet, artist, philosopher, and I was having a conversation with her on the internet. I think she lives in Austria or somewhere in Europe. And she asked me today, I gave her this quote by Aiken Roshi, and she wrote back, what's rational? What is rational? Well, that's interesting. What do we mean by that word? What's rational mean to you?
What you can explain.
You can explain, okay?
Comprehend.
You can explain and comprehend something in our world that might be complex even.
That's rational, yeah. That's from mind.
The mind,
The mind.
explaining something,
Yes.
clarifying something, okay? Anyone else?
Logical, provable, that it's based on a system of known reality.
Okay, there's a lot of things you just said in there. Logic, I get. Logic is 2 plus 2 is always going to equal 4.
Right.
And that's why planes fly and cars don't drive into buildings.
Yes.
That's important. Logic is important. Yeah? Yeah, so to me, part of the rational piece is that we do have logic, and it doesn't change. The parameters don't, the parts don't change. They stay the same. Yeah.
To me, rational isn't fixed.
It's not fixed. Yep.
Rational in one instance may not be rational in another, just as logical in one instance may not be logical in the next circumstance. So
No,
it's not, to me, it's not a fixed point.
okay, but 2 plus 2 always equals 4, doesn't it?
Does it?
Oh, no, it doesn't?
It may not.
No, I don't. I think it has to. Planes wouldn't fly. Things would not work in our world if 2 plus 2 equaled something other than 4.
I suppose you could have 2 dozen plus 2 dozen. 2 units.
Okay.
Multiple units.
All right. So, okay. You're just changing the units, though. The units don't change. You can't say 2 plus 2 equals 5. That's just not true. It's not logical.
Rabbits, 2 male rabbits and 2 female rabbits in a cage might
Okay. over time. So maybe depends, the logic depends on your time frame that you're looking at, the 2 plus 2. Okay, but then everything is a postmodern soup of nothing, relativity, and there's no ground.
There is no ground, right? I mean, I'm really,
Well, there is and there isn't.
I'm not trying to be
No,
combative. I just think that when we fix our reality, we get into trouble.
Well, I would say gravity is rational.
You can't, gravity is...
Is gravity rational or is gravity...
Well, but, I mean, it's, some part of our physical world is here, and it's not.
I'm going into maybe semantics too, what is rational?
Well, there's a lot, it's interesting. I mean, I can already see there's a lot of different points of view about what we mean by rational. So, one way of thinking about rational, which I probably would get some agreement with many of you, is that my rational mind can override my felt sense. My rational mind can say, you know, that is really sick. That swamp that's down there in your stomach is really just a mess, and you need to get rid of it soon because it's really, it's just sick. And so my rational mind overrides this, whatever the sickness is here, and now the world is no longer medicine. Now I've done something. I've overridden the wisdom here with some certainty that I want here. And I've repressed, I put down that aliveness in me in some way. That's one way we might use rational, but I still am going to maintain logic, because planes would not fly without logic. We wouldn't be able to operate planes without logic. So somehow I think logic is actually very important. It's just one thing, though. It's not the whole ball of wax. It's just one thing that seems to, it has its own way of confirming what is true. And it always confirms it in the same way, it seems to me. But we could, obviously there's going to be different points of view about this.
What seems to be logic can be narrative that's subjective.
Mm-hmm. You want to say more about that?
Well, I could think that I'm quite certain about a line of thinking that I have, even perhaps have proven to myself that could not reside in that might not reside in your head. So it's my narrative, my story, my piecing together even experience. Not just thought, but lived experience. But it could vary from Michael's lived experience.
So you're saying the way that you put together events in your memory is logic?
Could be. I mean, as an example of logic being a personal narrative. Now that's not going to fly the plane. No,
it's not going to fly the plane. Memory is, we think we have memory is solid, but neuroscience would indicate that our memories are very, very fluid and change. Even as we're remembering something, it'll change. And people can have the same view or experience of something and have 10 different memories of it. So it seems to be pretty fluid. But the narrative is also important, isn't it? That we have a story that gives us meaning about who we are. So I don't know where else to go with this, but it seems to me where the rubber meets the road is right where we're standing, or right where you're sitting, and how we open to the paradox in the mystery of our human experience. And I think that is part of what gives our Zen traditions some vitality and relevance for us right now. And as we let that paradox within us inform who we are, then what comes with that is some strength and resolve to hold our ground for what is important. Because otherwise, we are losing our footing. So let me read something to you that Nora Bateson wrote. The millions of people who are forced now for economic, ecological, and political reasons to start new lives in new lands are dangerous, not because they will deplete the social services of the developed countries they enter, but because in the act of refusal by the developed countries, the integrity of civilization is being condemned.
Could you say that again?
Well, I'll paraphrase it now. Immigrants are not dangerous because they're going to overrun our population and take away our jobs. They're dangerous because of our reaction to them, our fear that excludes them from our country. And in the process, we lose who we are. We lose the integrity of what makes us what we value most about who we are.
Can I say something that circles back to something you started with?
Mm-hmm.
So on the radio this morning they said that Somalians were walking across the Canadian border and having frostbite of their hands and feet.
Yeah.
And Canadians were finding these people coming out of the woods. And I don't know that much about Somalia.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm reminded of like the Tom Hanks movie with the Somalian pirates and all those things that were in the paper, right? But so here with these people who don't live in Somalia anymore because it's unsafe, and now they don't live in U.S. anymore because it's unsafe. They walked to Canada, lost fingers and toes, and back to the nurturing the child until it was 3 or 4, that sense of bonding and safety, all of that family has lost that sense of safety, and they're in a very hyper-aroused, sympathetic, neurological state, trying to find their safety and find a place to rest their bottom and sleep in safety. And so you've got these people that are hyper-aroused, they're going to have more illnesses. They're going to have more mental illnesses.
Yeah.
Their children are going to have more
That's
trouble.
right. That's right. And who we are, what we have valued about our country, what seems to have gone missing in this election is there is so much antipathy and anger in our culture now. So from both sides, both enormous aggression and lack of dignity and civility in our language, in our discourse, in our dialogues. Closer to home, we just learned about this the other day. We're approaching the possibility of the center becoming more involved with immigrants here in Chicago. And we just learned of there's a church in Pilsen which consists of Guatemalans and El Salvadorians and people from South America, Central America. And they have a member of their church who is not an American citizen, who joined the army and went to Afghanistan and fought for 2 years, and thinking that by joining the army he would become an American citizen. But he didn't. He wasn't an American citizen. Hey, that may seem unfair, but think of all the proxy armies in the world that fight for other empires. They're never citizens of the empire. They're just stool pigeons that get put on the front lines. But anyway, he went to Afghanistan thinking he would become an American citizen, came back with PTSD, got involved with drugs, got on the wrong side of the law, was put in prison, and now they want to deport him. And you can debate whether he should be deported or not. That could be a dialogue that we could have. Both sides could actually come down on either side of that. What you can't debate is what is, well, you could, but it seems to me there's a line where you can't debate, which is what's happening is that church has decided, made a decision to be a sanctuary for that man, and they are now being intimidated and by right-wing extremists who are writing slogans on the walls of their church, who are intimidating when people go to Bible study. And this is a poor church. These people don't have a lot of resources. That, to me, seems like a line too far. And I don't see how you can argue in any way that that right-wing group is doing something that we would support in any way whatsoever. That's fascism. And that's a line too far. That's the difference that makes a difference, as Gregory Bateson would say. And at some point, you put your foot down and say, that is not okay. We are not going to allow that to happen in our community. That's a line too far. And that's where we're at, right? I think that is the situation. That was shocking when I heard it yesterday. I think it was just yesterday. We've been working with people that are working with immigration services and organizations, or we've been trying to learn about it. And when I heard that the other day, it was really appalling to me and shocking. And I thought, oh, it's that's not okay. That is just not okay.
I have had an image coming to me lately, just really for about a week, and it's it's that the idea that we do need to be warriors.
Mm-hmm.
But what came to mind is the martial arts image. You know, we've got so much coming at us. Every week it's another issue. Is it this cabinet member? Is it this issue? Is it immigration? Is it the pipeline? Is it which group of peoples is being targeted this week that we need to say something, do something about? And so one of my thoughts on that is that how do you not get just kind of like rattled by all of this? How do you keep the energy flowing? And in martial arts, it's much like Zen, and that you're centered. It's much like Tai Chi. Tai Chi is a martial arts. You know,
absolutely.
It's going with the energy. It's so that when somebody comes from behind, you're going with that energy. You're not reacting against. You're not just punching somebody out angrily. It's that koan. You're not going forward and falling into the anger, and you're not going backward and falling into the hell. And
you're not doing nothing and falling into the dead water.
You're dancing with the energy. You're being present in the now. And so my image is that we need to be martial artists in this time.
Yeah, some of us are martial artists. We need to be grounded like martial artists. Our practice can help us be grounded. But we do have, we are a Zen Peacemaker training center now, and we have lots of experience and skills for how to bear witness to things out there that are violent and troubling, and we could bear witness, and we could find a way to bear witness to this situation that would not contribute to more violence, and we could be a force of helping to reconcile something if we wanted to.
I wasn't thinking be martial artists with a sword.
No, I understand. I'm just saying that I think that where the rubber meets the road for us as a community is a live question right now. And I'm not suggesting what we're going to do, but I can say that we have a practice of not knowing, bearing witness, and loving action. And we know how to do each of those, and we can do them out there. And that may be, I think that's where the rubber meets the road now for us, is that we need to actually start to consider how we're going to respond to things that are going on out there that are not acceptable to us. And it's like before, maybe one of the silver linings of this whole mess is that it is, kind of awakened us to what we were complacent about before, that now something has gone missing and we see it and it's not acceptable. And we have to be, we are activated by that in some way.
I have a friend I've known for some 10 years. I met him as a literacy student. He is here with his family, 3 children, but he is here illegally. He has a felony against him because he lied to the border authorities coming in from Mexico. Where he's from. And I've been trying to reach him lately, and he's not responding. I suspect he's pretty scared.
A lot of immigrants now are really living in a lot of fear and panic about, there's so much uncertainty about their futures. Like it's the same kind of situation they're in. They just don't know whether they're going to be deported. And there are now in about 6 or 7 states, the immigration authorities are starting to round up what they call illegal immigrants. And this is happening now. It's not. One more question, then we're going to have to close. We've reached the time.
Well, I have a comment. So I'm familiar with what you're talking about, Miguel Perez Jr. And I managed to make my way down to that church last Sunday, and then also go to the court hearing on Monday. Met a lot of the folks there, and in terms of being a warrior, what I saw was that the confrontation wasn't this right-wing group you're talking about, but was ICE, was the government lawyers.
Oh, I see.
And the case they're making to deport him, and being in the courtroom, and the attorney he uses pro bono, and they accept volunteer help.
I see.
Make that case, and so part of resisting that, what's happening with immigration is, on the legal front, and as well as the political activist front to mobilize people to push back. Yeah. I also want to say, in terms of your that quote you had about going backwards or the angry gods, is that and part of what we're dealing with are not gods, but as people, some really awful people who want to enact their own agenda, and they're not as powerful as gods.
No, it's a metaphor. It's not to be literalized.
Well, I guess I understand it, except that I think people can feel that the enormity of the government and what we face is almost as difficult to resist as a god.
I see.
What we need to keep in mind is that, in fact, there are legal and peaceful ways to resist that. There's some kind of sense of relief that the courts got involved in all of our politics, and we have a secular legal tradition which is very sane in a certain way. It does not cater to the same forces that happen in our political world, which seem to be all over the place. There's actual legal precedents and arguments which are rational and are argued, which is kind of a relief after all the other chaos. But the last thing I'm really happy to hear you did that, Jake. Maybe we're thinking about forming a social action circle to begin talking about what we can do as a community. You might want to be a part of that. I'm happy to hear that you are involved in that. And I guess the last thing I would say is about the angry gods and the hungry ghosts is that we can all feel anger at injustices. And when I taught the forgiveness workshop last year, one of the things that I said that's really powerful about forgiveness, if we take that on as an intentional practice, is that working with forgiveness has to do with acknowledging injustice, not papering it over. Some injustice happens to you or to someone you know or to someone in your community, and you have a right to feel anger about that. It should not have happened. But if you hold on to the anger, it becomes a poison. And I think part of the strength of our practice is that we have the ability to have the anger and allow it to be here in a justified way.
but then working with that so that it gets transmuted into a wisdom. Because if you act out of anger out there, I don't think we're just going to spread our aggression around, and we have something more to offer than that. We have a real strength here, and I think it's, the last thing I would say is that we have a race circle that could be doing this, it's meeting next week, or we could have another circle that is a little bit more broadly based on social action that might be responding, figuring out ways we might start responding to what's going on in our community. And we're going to discuss this at our next board meeting, to see what are the implications of all this, how we might want to become involved as a community. And then I think after the board meeting, I may have a community-wide meeting to discuss this with everyone. And I hope you become more involved. We need to learn what's actually happening, and you were there, so, yeah. Okay. Thank you. Enjoy the weekend. Enjoy the sunshine. It's out there.